The Toyota Camry smelled like instant noodles, children's shampoo, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists when someone is working very hard to pretend everything is fine. It was the 6th night. Sarah Mitchum had parked behind the same 4-hour laundromat on West Division Street that she had been circling back to every other night, close enough to the exhaust vents that a little warmth leaked through the rear of the end lot, far enough from the front windows that the night manager would not notice. She had learned the rhythms of this block, the way you learn the layout of a house you have lived in for years, which streetlight flickered at 2 in the morning, which dumpster the raccoons came to at 4, which angle to park so the headlights of passing cars did not sweep directly across the back seat. In the back seat, her 3 children slept. Owen, 4 years old, was curled into the crook of Maya's arm with his mouth open and his small chest rising and falling in an uneven rhythm that Sarah had been listening to for 2 days. Now the faint rattle at the end of each exhale that meant his cough was getting worse. She had given him the last quarter of a children's acetaminophen tablet at 9 that evening.
Everybody be quiet,
she was
don't make a
trying
sound.
not to think about what happened if his temperature climbed again before morning. Maya, 8, slept with her sketchbook clutched to her chest, the way other children slept with stuffed animals. Even in sleep, her fingers were curled loosely around a red crayon. On the seat beside her, visible in the pale orange light of the parking lot, was a drawing she had finished that afternoon at the public library. A small house with a yellow window, neat and deliberate. The kind of window that meant someone was home inside and the lights were on and it was warm. Beneath it, in careful second-grade handwriting, "Our house." Sarah had looked at that drawing for a long time before she folded it and put it back in the sketchbook without saying anything. Daniel, 11, was not asleep. He was sitting up against the window on the far side of the back seat, with his knees drawn to his chest and his jacket pulled tight, watching the street. He had been doing this every night, staying up after the younger 2 drifted off, keeping some kind of silent watch that he had appointed himself to without being asked. Every so often his eyes moved to the rearview mirror, found his mother's, and held there for a moment before sliding away. He did not ask questions. He had not asked a single question in 6 days. That was the thing that kept Sarah awake more than the cold. 3 weeks ago, their life had been small but solid. A 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a rental building on Kedzie Avenue, cramped, with a radiator that clanked all winter and a bathroom tile that had been cracked since before they moved in, but theirs. Sarah worked the overnight laundry shift at the Carlisle Hotel downtown, running sheets and towels through industrial machines from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, and the schedule was brutal but the pay was steady, and her manager, a tired woman named Donna, had never once questioned her when she needed to leave early for a sick kid. She had a system. She had a routine. She had a deposit saved toward a larger place, in a folder in the kitchen drawer, in cash, because she did not fully trust banks. The gas leak happened on a Tuesday. A maintenance crew found it in the basement, a corroded fitting on one of the old pipes, the kind of thing that should have been replaced years ago, but had not been, because the building's owner had a talent for deferring anything that cost money. The city inspector condemned the building for emergency repairs. Residents had 48 hours to vacate. Sarah called the landlord 3 times. When he finally answered, he explained, in a tone of practiced inconvenience, that the deposit would be held against property damages, a clause buried on page 4 of the lease she had signed 3 years ago, without reading carefully enough, and that there was nothing he could do about the timeline. She had $213 in her checking account and a folder of cash that turned out, when she counted it in the Walgreens parking lot at 10 that night, to be $340, not enough for first month, last month, and deposit anywhere in the city. Not enough for a motel for more than 2 nights. Not enough. She called her sister in Milwaukee. Voicemail. She called her mother's old friend Carol, whom she had not spoken to in 2 years. The number was disconnected. She called the city's homeless services line and was placed on a waiting list and told she would be contacted within 5 to 7 business days. 5 to 7 business days. Owen had watched her make the calls from the kitchen floor, pushing a toy truck in slow circles. When she hung up the last time and sat very still at the kitchen table, he drove his truck over to her foot and made a small engine noise. "Okay," Sarah said, to no one in particular. Okay. She packed the car that night. Clothes in garbage bags, Owen's medication, the sketchbook Maya could not sleep without, the folder of cash tucked into her coat pocket. She told the kids they were going on a winter adventure like camping, but in the car, which was actually more fun than a tent, because you could listen to the radio. Owen had clapped. Maya asked if they could get hot chocolate. Daniel looked at her with quiet eyes that saw everything, and said nothing at all. He knew from the first night. Sarah understood this now, sitting in the driver's seat at midnight on day 6 with the heat running in 10-minute intervals to preserve the gas, and her oldest child watching the street in the dark. She had told herself the story she needed to tell herself, that she was protecting them, that children were resilient, that this was temporary, that in a few more days a shelter would have space, or she would find someone who could help, or something would shift. She had turned it into a game because games were what she knew how to do. She had been doing it since their father left when Owen was 18 months old, finding ways to make the hard things into something the kids could survive without being marked by it. But Daniel had not been fooled for a single night. He had just decided not to say so. At midnight, with Maya and Owen breathing slowly in the back, Daniel shifted against the window and spoke in a low, careful voice, the way he spoke when he had been rehearsing something. Mom. Yeah, baby. A pause. You don't have to keep calling it a winter adventure. He was not accusatory. He was not even sad. Exactly. Just tired in a way that 11-year-olds are not supposed to be tired. I've known since the first night. I just didn't want to make it harder for you. Sarah did not say anything for a moment. The laundromat's exhaust hummed. A car passed on the street, headlights sweeping over the dash and gone. How long have you been staying up to keep watch? She asked. Every night. She closed her eyes. Her son, her boy, who was supposed to be worrying about homework and basketball tryouts, and whatever drama was happening in the 6th grade, had been sitting up alone in the dark every night for 6 days, keeping watch so she could rest, carrying the weight of knowing without being asked to carry it, protecting her from the guilt of his own awareness. 11 years old. Daniel, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. Come here. He climbed over the center console and sat in the passenger seat, and she put her arm around him, and he leaned into her the way he had not done in at least a year, the way kids do when they have been pretending to be older than they are for too long and something finally gives. I'm going to fix this, she said. He did not answer. He did not have to. She felt him nod against her shoulder, and she held on. And outside the wind moved the bare branches of the trees along West Division, and in the back seat Owen coughed once in his sleep, and Sarah sat very still and made herself believe the words she had just said. The public library on North Pulaski closed at 8. Sarah had learned this on day 2, when she had walked the kids there after school and spent the afternoon watching Owen sleep across 2 chairs pushed together while Daniel did homework at a table near the window, and Maya filled 3 pages of her sketchbook. The librarian, a heavy-set woman in her 60s, named Mrs. Okafor, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and noticed everything had given them a table in the far corner near the radiator without being asked. She had brought Owen a blanket from the staff room and set it on the chair beside him without making eye contact with Sarah, as if she understood that the kindness would only land if it was not named. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Okafor had left a paper bag on the table while they were in the bathroom. Inside, 4 apples, a sleeve of crackers, and 2 juice boxes. No note. Sarah had stood in the library bathroom for 4 minutes before she could go back out. By day 6, Daniel had the routine down without being told. He picked Maya up from her classroom at the elementary school, 2 blocks from his middle school, walked her to the library, settled Owen into the corner chair, distributed the snacks from the Ziploc bag Sarah packed each morning, and opened his homework. When the librarian announced closing time, he packed everything back into the bags and waited by the front door with his brother and sister on either side of him, already watching for the Camry's headlights. One afternoon, Mrs. Okafor crouched beside the table and asked quietly, "Are you 3 doing okay?" Daniel looked up from his notebook. He did not hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. Our mom's at work." Mrs. Okafor looked at him for a moment, the lunch bag, the sleeping 4-year-old, The way Daniel's body had positioned itself between the librarian and his siblings without him seeming to notice he had done it. Then she went back to her desk. Daniel watched her go, turned back to his homework, and did not look up again. At the Carlisle Hotel, Sarah folded fitted sheets with the efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times and let her mind run the numbers she ran every night. The emergency shelter on Milwaukee Avenue had a waiting list of 40 families. The one on Sacramento had stopped accepting new intakes until February. She had found a church program that offered 2-night stays but required a referral from a caseworker, and the caseworker she had been assigned had not returned her call in 3 days. Her coworker Deja, who worked the pressing machines on the far side of the room, had asked once why Sarah looked so tired. Sarah said she had had trouble sleeping. She had not told Donna. She had not told anyone at the hotel. Her annual review and the raise she had been counting on since October was 3 weeks away, and she understood with a cold clarity that employee is currently living in her car with 3 children was the kind of information that made managers uncomfortable in ways they could not always name, and that discomfort had a way of showing up later in paperwork, in scheduling, in the particular tone of a performance review. So she folded sheets and ran the numbers and called the waiting lists on her break, standing outside the loading dock in the cold with her phone pressed to her ear. And each night, she drove back to her children and chose a new parking spot and told herself, one more day. The 7th night was colder than the others. A front had moved in from the northwest sometime around 4 in the afternoon, dropping the temperature 12 degrees in 2 hours. By the time Sarah picked up the kids from the library at 8, her breath was visible inside the car before the heat came on. Owen was quieter than usual. When she pressed her hand to his forehead at a red light, she felt the warmth before she even made contact. "How are you feeling, buddy?" "Okay," he said, in the small voice he used when he was not okay. She drove to the laundromat on West Division and parked in the usual spot and gave him half a juice box and told him to lie down. He did not argue, which told her more than his temperature had. Maya fell asleep quickly, her sketchbook on her chest, one hand loosely holding a crayon. She stirred once, pulling the sketchbook closer, and then was still. Daniel sat up in the passenger seat tonight. He had started doing this the night before, and Sarah had not asked him to change it. Having him up front felt like something, though she could not have said what, exactly. At 10:30, Owen woke up crying. Not the sharp cry of a nightmare, the low, miserable cry of a child who hurts and does not understand why and wants it to stop. Sarah climbed into the back seat and held him against her chest and felt the heat radiating off his small body and thought, "I need to get him inside." "Shh," she said. "Shh, I've got you." "Hot," Owen said. "I'm hot, Mommy." Daniel had turned around from the front seat. Without a word, he unzipped his jacket, the gray zip-up he had been wearing every day, the warmest thing he owned, and reached back to spread it over Owen's legs. "Daniel, keep your jacket." "I'm not cold," he said, in the flat tone that meant he was and did not want to discuss it. Sarah looked at her son. He looked back at her. His face in the orange light of the parking lot was 11 years old, and also something older and quieter than that. And it was this, not the cold, not the fever, not the 6 nights, or the waiting lists, or the $180 left in her account, that finally broke through something she had been keeping sealed for days. She had run out of moves. She did not say it, but Daniel saw it on her face, the way he always saw everything, and he did not look away. The black SUV pulled into the lot at 10:47. Sarah noticed it the way she had learned to notice everything in parking lots at night. Peripheral, immediate, cataloging. Too clean for this block, too expensive. It pulled in slowly and stopped 20 feet behind the Camry and sat there with its engine running. She put her hand on the door lock. Inside the SUV, Carol Hendricks had been driving Thomas Ellison for 9 years. She had driven him to board meetings and airports and hospital rooms and, twice, to funerals. She knew when he wanted to talk and when he did not, and she knew the precise quality of silence that meant he was thinking about something that was not the road. He had been quiet since they left the building site on Huron Street, a 4-acre parcel he had been circling for 2 years. Empty lots and a condemned warehouse he was planning to fold into a mixed-use development. Good location. Clean title. The kind of deal Thomas Ellison made in his sleep. Carol had pulled out of the lot and turned south on Division, and that was when she saw the Camry. Not the car itself, the windows. Every window fogged over from the inside, the dense, uniform condensation that meant bodies, multiple bodies, had been breathing in that enclosed space for hours. And beneath the fog, a sound she almost missed, a child coughing. Carol had grown up in Englewood, the youngest of 5, in a house where her mother had worked 2 jobs, and the heat sometimes went out in January, and you learned early to notice when something was wrong, even when nobody was saying so. She had never once in 9 years of driving, Thomas Ellison made a decision about his schedule without asking him first. She stopped the car. "What is it?" Thomas said. "There are children in that car." She said it simply. She was not asking permission. Thomas Ellison was 54 years old and had been described in 3 separate magazine profiles as formidably self-contained. He looked at the fogged windows of the Camry for a long moment. The coughing came again, thin and persistent, the sound of a small chest working harder than it should. He did not tell Carol to drive on. Carol got out of the car. Sarah saw the door open and a woman step out, composed, moving toward the Camry with a directness that was not aggressive but also was not asking. She locked the doors. She lowered the window 2 inches. "We're leaving," Sarah said. "We'll be out of the lot in 5 minutes. I'm not looking for any trouble." How many nights have the kids been sleeping in the car? The question landed differently than she expected. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Do you need help?" Not any of the questions Sarah had rehearsed answers to. This question assumed the answer and asked only for the number. Sarah opened her mouth. In the back seat, Daniel was very still. He was not looking at the woman outside. He was looking at his mother. Not pleading, not performing, just watching, with those quiet eyes that had been watching her for 6 days and had never once looked away. She could not lie in front of those eyes. "7," she said. "Tonight is the 7th. Carol did not react with pity. She did not make a sound. She nodded once, as if Sarah had confirmed something she had already understood. "My name is Carol. The man in the car is Thomas Ellison. He would like to get your children into a warm room tonight, a hotel. Nothing asked of you. No conditions." She paused. "The little one sounds like he needs to be inside." From behind Sarah, Owen made a small sound and pressed closer against her. "People who say no conditions always have conditions," Sarah said. "That's a fair thing to believe." Carol did not argue it. "And you're the one who decides. But I'm asking you to consider that your son is running a fever in a parking lot in November, and the offer is a warm room, and that's all it is." The driver's door of the SUV opened. Thomas Ellison stepped out, tall, in a dark overcoat, his breath fogging in the cold air. He did not come closer. He stood beside his car and looked across the distance at Sarah, and she looked back at him, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Daniel, very quietly, from the back seat, "Mom." Just her name, nothing else. But in the way he said it, not as a request, not as pressure, just as a reminder that she was not alone in this decision, and that whatever she chose, she was not choosing only for herself. She heard everything she needed to hear. She looked at Owen. His face was flushed. Daniel's jacket was still spread over his legs. Maya was awake now, sitting up, holding her sketchbook, watching her mother with wide eyes that were trying very hard to look calm. Sarah looked at her children. Then she unlocked the door. "My kids go in first," she said. "And nobody separates them from me. Not for any reason." "Understood," Thomas said. He had not moved from beside his car. Completely understood. The hotel was called the Meridian, and it was 12 blocks from the laundromat on West Division, and it was the kind of place Sarah had laundered sheets for without ever expecting to sleep in one. Carol drove. Thomas sat in the front passenger seat and made a phone call that lasted 90 seconds, spoke to someone named Marcus at the front desk, and hung up. He did not explain the call. He did not ask Sarah questions. He sat facing forward and let the city move past the windows and gave her family the back seat without making it feel like charity. Sarah sat between Maya and Owen. Daniel sat on Owen's other side with his jacket back on now. Sarah had insisted, and Owen had fallen half asleep against Daniel's arm by the time they pulled under the hotel's covered entrance. Marcus was waiting at the front desk with 2 key cards and the specific kind of professional warmth that meant Thomas Ellison had called ahead and said, "Take care of these people," and Marcus had understood exactly what that meant. He did not ask for ID. He did not ask Sarah to fill out forms. He handed her the key cards and said the room was on the 4th floor and that there was a 24-hour room service menu on the desk if the children were hungry. Maya tugged Sarah's sleeve. "Are we staying here?" "For tonight," Sarah said. "It smells like a swimming pool," Owen said, drowsy and reverent. "That's the chlorine from the pool downstairs," Daniel said. "There's a pool?" Maya's eyes went wide. "You're going to sleep," Sarah said, and steered them toward the elevator. The room was a double queen, clean and warm, with heavy curtains and a heating unit that worked, and a bathroom with white towels folded into neat rectangles on the rack. Sarah stood in the doorway of the bathroom for a moment after she turned on the light, looking at those towels, the same towels she handled every night at the Carlisle. Shaken out and folded on a conveyor belt, and felt the strange dislocation of finding yourself on the other side of something familiar. She ran the bath for Owen first. He sat in the warm water up to his chest with a washcloth on his head that Sarah kept rinsing in cool water, and some of the flush went out of his cheeks while she watched. By the time she lifted him out and wrapped him in one of the white towels, his temperature had come down and his eyes were heavy. "Are we going back to the car tomorrow?" he asked. "No," Sarah said. She said it before she had fully decided it was true, and then she held on to it. "No, baby, we're not." He was asleep before she finished pulling the covers over him. Maya bathed herself with the focus of someone who had been waiting very patiently for this and intended to do it properly. She emerged from the bathroom with her hair damp and her sketchbook already in her hands, sat cross-legged on the second bed, and opened to the drawing she had made at the library, the small house with the yellow window. "Our house" written beneath it in careful letters. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she uncapped a yellow crayon and began to color. She did not change anything about the drawing. She just filled in the window slowly, carefully, staying inside the lines until the yellow was deep and even and warm-looking. The kind of yellow that meant the lights were on inside and someone was home. Then she closed the sketchbook and lay down and was asleep within minutes. Daniel sat on the edge of the second bed and unlaced his shoes with the deliberate patience of someone who had been doing everything deliberately and patiently for a very long time and was only now allowing himself to slow down. When Sarah sat beside him, he leaned against her shoulder the same way he had in the car the night before, and she put her arm around him, and he stayed there until his breathing deepened and she realized he had fallen asleep sitting up. She eased him down onto the pillow. She sat in the chair by the window for a long time after all three of them were asleep, listening to them breathe. Owen's chest clear now, the rattle quieted, and looked out at the city and let herself feel, just for a few minutes, the full weight of everything she had been holding at arm's length for 7 days. She did not cry. She thought she might, but she did not. She just sat in the warm room with her sleeping children and breathed, and let it be enough. Thomas Ellison was in the hotel lobby at 7 the next morning, sitting in one of the low chairs near the window with a coffee he was not drinking, looking out at the street. He stood when Sarah came off the elevator. She had left the kids sleeping, Daniel awake, but watching over the younger two, already so naturally a guardian that Sarah had had to remind herself he was in 6th grade. "How is your son?" Thomas asked. "Better. Fever broke around 3. She sat down across from him. "I want to know why you did this." It was not an accusation. It was a straightforward question, asked directly, without decoration, because she had learned that the decorative version of a hard question usually got you the decorative version of a hard answer. Thomas looked at the untouched coffee in his hands. "When I was 8 years old," he said, "my mother and I were evicted from our apartment in January. She had a car, an old Buick, barely running. We sat in it for 2 nights in a parking lot in Gary, Indiana, because she did not know where else to go and she did not want me to know how scared she was." He paused. "She told me we were camping." Sarah was very still. "The second night, it snowed. I remember watching it come down through the window and thinking it was beautiful, because I was 8 and I did not yet understand what it meant for us. No one came. Not that night. Not the next morning. We got out eventually. My mother found a shelter with a space, and slowly things came back together. But I never forgot what it felt like to sit in that car and watch people walk past and not stop. He set the coffee down and looked at her. Last night, when Carol stopped the car, I thought someone is going to do for those children what nobody did for us. He paused. That was all it was. Sarah was quiet for a moment. That's not a small thing, she said. No, he agreed. But it wasn't complicated either. It turned out Thomas Ellison owned 3 properties within a mile of where Sarah had been parking the Camry. One of them, a vacant 6-flat on Washtenaw Avenue, cleared for demolition that had been delayed twice by permit issues, had been sitting empty for 14 months. He did not make an announcement about what he decided to do with it. He did not call a press conference or issue a statement. He called a contractor, then a social services coordinator he had worked with before, then his attorney to handle the liability framework. He converted the building into transitional housing for families experiencing sudden displacement, 8 units, furnished, with a 3-month maximum stay and a caseworker on site 2 days a week to help residents find permanent housing. He paid for the renovation himself. He did not name the building after anyone. When a reporter from a local news site found out about it 4 months later and called for a comment, Thomas's assistant relayed a single sentence. It was an empty building, and there were people who needed a place to stay. Sarah and her children stayed at the Meridian for 4 nights while Carol helped her connect with a housing caseworker, a legal aid attorney who specialized in tenant rights, and the coordinator of a community health nursing program at a clinic on the north side that was accepting applications for a paid training track. On the 5th day, Sarah moved into the Washtenaw building. It was not a perfect place. The radiator in Unit 4 was temperamental, and the elevator was slower than it should have been. But it was warm, and it was safe, and it was a door she could lock from the inside. And in the mornings when the light came through the east-facing windows, it fell at an angle that turned everything briefly, cleanly gold. Maya taped her drawing to the wall above her bed on the first day. She smoothed the corners down with her palm, stepped back, looked at it, and went to unpack her crayons without saying a word. Daniel slept past 7 on a Saturday morning for the first time since October. Owen recovered fully within a week. By the end of the month, he had opinions about which park was better and which brand of crackers was acceptable, and approximately 40 questions about whether the building had a dog, and Sarah, listening to him negotiate these positions with Maya across the dinner table, felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized she had been clenching. She finished the nursing program 11 months later and was hired by the clinic before she had completed her final practicum rotation. She gave 2 weeks' notice at the Carlisle on a Thursday morning. Donna shook her hand and said she would be missed on the laundry floor, and Sarah thanked her and meant it. She drove home in the Camry still running, the check engine light having been on for 5 months now, and sat in the parking lot of their building for a minute before going upstairs. Through the 4th-floor window, she could see the warm yellow light of the kitchen, and Maya's drawing taped to the wall of the room beyond it, and the small dark shape of Owen moving past the window with something in his hand that was probably a cracker. She thought about the distance between the life she was living now and the one she might still be living, still circling, still calling waiting lists from loading docks in the cold. The distance was a single moment in which someone had chosen to stop. She went upstairs and made dinner, and listened to her children argue about the television, and felt, with a steadiness she had been building for almost a year, that she was going to be okay. It was a Wednesday in late October when she saw the car. She was coming off an evening shift at the clinic, cutting through the parking lot of Mercy Hospital because it was 2 blocks shorter than going around, and she noticed it the way she noticed things now, the way certain cars sat in parking lots at night, weighted and still, with fogged windows. A sedan, older model, backed into a corner spot near the exit. Every window clouded over from the inside. No engine running. Sarah stopped walking. She stood there in the cold, her breath fogging in front of her, her bag over her shoulder. She thought about what it felt like to be on the other side of those windows. The way sounds from outside came in muffled and strange. The way headlights swept over the ceiling in the dark. The way you held yourself very still when you heard footsteps, not knowing if they were coming toward you or passing by. She thought about what it had meant that someone had stopped. She crossed the parking lot. She stood beside the fogged window and raised her hand and knocked gently. The way you knock when you want someone to know you are not a threat, that you are not there to move them along, or ask for anything, or make their night harder than it already is. A long pause. Then the window came down 2 inches. A woman's eyes. Tired, wary, afraid in the way of someone who has learned that strangers approaching in parking lots at night are rarely bringing good news. Sarah knew that look. She had worn it herself. "Hi," she said quietly. "My name is Sarah. I'm not here to ask you to move." She paused, finding the right words, not "Are you okay?" Not the question that bounced off, but the one that had gotten through to her, that had assumed the truth and asked only for the measure of it. "How many nights have you been out here?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then the window came down a little further, and the woman inside looked at her, really looked. The way you look at someone when you are trying to decide if they are real, and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "3. Sarah nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let me tell you about some people who can help."